Mr. Choi, in South Korea. What does that mean? Vice President Pence visit to Seoul, this time now going to demilitarized zone rather, and made the statements he said. Is that in a way heartwarming to South Korea, reassured in any way?
Yes, I think Vice President Mr. Pence's visit to South Korea is the most top leader among the Trump administration. What does this mean? That the United States' commitment to protect South Korea's dangerous situation against North Korea's nuclear and missile threat. This is a very good signal for the United States to have a commitment for South Korea's security.
Mr. Pollack, though, is the military guarantee, so-called aircraft carrier, be enough to help with the security?
Well, I think that the deployment of the carrier very much is in the context of the annual exercises that are seen between the United States and the ROK in March and April every year. North Korea tends to react very, very sharply to them, makes all kinds of threats and warnings. So it's therefore a prudent step to take. It's not a precursor of a war. It's a very, very necessary measure, in my belief, to ensure that the citizens of Korea and also the American soldiers in Korea are aware that there are real options if things should go badly. But I don't think it's in any sense at all an intention to ratchet up tensions or be a precursor of a much larger crisis.
All right. Let's hear what the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence had to say during an unannounced visit to the demilitarized zone in South Korea. He expressed impatience, of course, as we mentioned earlier, with the unwillingness of the DPRK to move toward the riddling itself of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. He also pointed to the decades when the U.S. first confronted Pyongyang over trying to make nuclear weapons, followed by a period of patience. And then he emphasized that the time of patience has run its course. Also, no strategic patience. But, you know, Mr. Pollack, Clinton administration, DPRK began to develop its nuclear program. Then comes the Bush administration, six-party talks. Then comes the Obama administration, so-called strategic patience. Now comes the Trump administration saying no strategic patience. One after another slogan with some actions, none of them worked.
Well, the first thing to keep in mind, Tianwei, is that the North Korean interest in nuclear weapons goes back long before any of the administrations you just mentioned. It has been a goal of North Korea since the very earliest years of the DPRK. I think the historical evidence substantiates that. I've written about this, others have as well. So this is not a new issue or one that merely one or another American president has had to confront. North Korea believes deeply, its leaders believe deeply, that they must be able to have autonomy from everyone, including China. And that's always been their goal. But I think the U.S. Vice President Pence and others are expressing what is naturally frustration about these circumstances, but very frankly, the so-called strategic patience is a misnomer. It really does reflect, I think at some level, a belief that the United States should not be endlessly trying to pursue North Korea in negotiations and so forth. But there's a long history here that goes back decades and decades and decades.
It is.
That's where we have to begin to understand
this. Mr. Pollack exactly rightly said, a long history. In a joint statement alongside acting South Korean President Hwang Kyo-ahn, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said the U.S. commitment to its ally is ironclad and also immutable. Mr. Pence reiterated that all options are on the table to deal with the threat. When the U.S. begin to talk about the all options, many would also have the imagination, what about that all options? Let's go to our panelist in Korea. many would ask, Mr. Choi, all options, does that also include the diplomatic options from the South Korean perspective? What about that option? Meanwhile, what about the option that China put forward as so-called a double track? One is to use pressure, the other is to guarantee security of DPRK. If we are talking about history here, no armistice, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion, yet between the North and the South, North and US. So what about all options?
Well, I think all options means, I think during the Obama administration, President Obama declares the strategic patience. That means, I think, strategic patience means excluding the military option. But the Trump administration emphasizing the terms, all option means possibly include military option.
Okay, so all option means military option.
That's a little bit different, right?
That's the only difference.
Yes.
What about that dual track thing? I mean, China suggested you have to go both pressure and also with the solution. Mr. Choi, do you think there is any hope about that?
Well, actually, we need to, in order to solve the nuclear issue, we need two tracks. One is to, not excluding the military option, and then we have to, pursue some kinds of diplomatic issue like six-party talks. But only one way to pursue through the six-party talk is not good enough. That's why all options need to be on the table.
That's interesting because according to Mr. Choi, Mr. Pollack, it seemed that he's suggesting the all options could be an option for bringing everybody together. For example, such as a format like the six-party talk. So Mr. Pollack, your inspiration here.
Well, I think, in a way, this is a slogan. It could mean whatever people like it to mean. But I think the more important words were expressed actually yesterday by National Security Advisor McMaster, who was on a visit to Afghanistan, and he indicated that the desire of the United States is, of course, to give more focus to this issue, but to exclude the use of force. He said this very specifically. I would take those words as a real indication of what the broad directions of U.S. policy are. The other aspect, of course, and I think that this is key, and this can build on the results of the Mar-a-Lago meeting between President Xi and President Trump, is that the United States and China seem closer to a shared recognition of the dangers and the risks on the peninsula than they have been at any previous time. So the point is, frankly, not to point the finger at one another, not to outsource the problem to one or the other, but to find a means by which the U.S. and China can actually coordinate and work much more closely together. I think that the possibilities of that have increased seriously, and now it's up to both China and the United States to pursue them.
Not just China and the United States, I guess, but also all parties. And Mr. Yang, what do you make of the comments made by your two colleagues coming from South Korea and the U.S.?
Well, all options on the table. Previously, President Donald Trump said that. But after the Xi Jinping-Trump meeting and phone talk, the two power got a consensus, say, just like Jonathan mentioned, U.S. U.S. National Advisor said is the little bit revised, say, all options on the table, that's the previous position. And the China's position, all options but military on the table. Now, I'm glad to see the two sides get a common ground, say, except military, we need to engage in all options, except military. So that's the common ground for the closer cooperation. But returning to the complex nuclear issue, the key question is, we want North Korea to give up nuclear weapon, but before that, we need to create an environment to let North Korea to do in confidence. Say, North Korea will ask, what if I give up nuclear weapon? Saddam Hussein fate or Syria fate? No one can guarantee. So peaceful solution is a beautiful goal, but the reality is very critical, and we need to make a huge effort to persuade North Korea to believe, even if they give up completely, irreversibly the nuclear weapon, they will certainly be safer rather than unsecured.
In that way, I have to invite the advice coming from Mr. Choi as well. Mr. Choi has been working on the unification issue for a long time, as well as peace. Mr. Choi, you know what you're doing, extremely challenging. You see also different administrations in your countries facing this challenge in very different attitudes. Now a change of presidency possibly. Where is the political consensus inside South Korea as an ally to the United States and as, of course, the neighbor to North Korea in order to bring what Mr. Yang termed as all options but military option in order to create an atmosphere?
Well, actually, South Korea has experience to have a war with North Korea. Which North Korea invaded South Korea a long time ago, 60 years ago. That kind of memory still exists in our older generations. So many, I think 70% of Korean people still remember that the North Korea threat is real. So without ignoring that kind of North Korea threat, it is very difficult for South Korea as a presidential candidate to pursue his policy. So that's why nowadays the opposition party leaders, the presidential candidate, changed their positions to from engagement to protect our country against North Korea's threat.
Right.
So security issue is getting momentum, even though it is very slowly.
I see. A complicated issue in every politics. Mr. Pollack, you also know Vice President Pence, his father used to get the Bronze Star for the so-called Korean War, and he was talking about so-called Pork Chop Hill battle. Of course, all sides are losers in any war, I guess. But how was that history likely to be played out again for a constructive role about the negotiations and the right atmosphere for any party to move on the right direction?
I think it's exceedingly important that all sides be very mindful of past history. The Korean War was extraordinarily devastating, first and foremost to the people on both sides of the 38th parallel, but to everyone else as well involved in the war. It's very easy to express strong words without regard for what the consequences might be. And in this respect, I think actually President Trump has been quite careful. He didn't do any tweeting about this over the weekend. I think he understands what the stakes and the risks are. So leaders have to choose their words very, very carefully. My biggest concern is one of miscalculation on the part of one or another party that could lead to a conflict that no one wishes to see.
Mr. Yang, final words.
Well, denuclearization and the peace, the stability is closely interconnected. It's just like one coin with two sides. You cannot keep one and give up the other.